Adverbial clauses, part 4. And here we look at purpose and result. In order to and so as to, here we have two conjunctions, multi-word conjunctions that have basically the same meaning. Let's look at an example. Zelda took out a housing loan in order to move to a more affluent area. Affluent means wealthy, and as you can see here, the in order to structure is followed by an infinitive. You could argue that what we had here was a full infinitive, infinitive plus 2 with in order, but it's generally described as in order to plus infinitive. Let's look at another example. Richard moved to the desert so as to avoid the rat race. Again, the infinitive. These two conjunctions have the same meaning. They both show purpose. So, took out the housing loan. The purpose was to move to a more affluent area. Move to the desert. The purpose was to avoid the rat race. So, they're both showing purpose. So they could be exchanged. Zelda took out a housing loan so as to move to a more affluent area, and Richard moved to the desert in order to avoid the rat race. A shorter version, a slightly more informal way to do this is to say Richard moved to the desert to avoid the rat race. So here we just have the full infinitive. We're essentially just taking the two from both of those with the infinitive, and we get the same meaning, but as I mentioned, slightly more informal. Okay, let's look at negatives. When we make these two negative, it is slightly more complicated. The CEO made severe cutbacks in order not to file for bankruptcy. So the thing to note here is that the not will actually go between order and to, rather than in this position, which you might have expected. So it just comes a little bit earlier than you might think, so as not to split apart the to and the infinitive. Let's look at another example. The delegates left for the airport at 4 a.m. so as not to expose themselves to security risks. So again, the not goes before the to and then the infinitive. Okay, moving down. All right, now let's look at a few other conjunctions here. So in order that, so that, and so. Einstein worked in the patent office in order that he could support his family. So here we're seeing the purpose of working in the patent office was so that he could support his family. Let's look at another one. William did his homework so that he would be allowed to go to the party. So same function here. They are interchangeable. And then finally, Maria worked at the supermarket so she could afford university. This is a slightly simpler version of the two above. Let's look at something to watch out for. Stefan didn't do his homework, so he must stay at home. If you compare these two, you'll see that there's actually a slightly different meaning. So let's just try placing so that in this position. Maria worked at the supermarket so that she could afford university. That makes perfect sense. Let's try it here. Stefan did his homework so that he must stay at home. That clearly does not work because we actually have a different function when we use this one. So what we're actually showing here is result. We're not showing purpose. So that is a different function, just so long as you're aware of that. Now, another problem that I sometimes see, let's perhaps use this example here. I often see students just removing, instead of putting so that, they just put that. William did his homework that he would be allowed to go to the party. That definitely does not work. It's quite common with German speakers, with students and Germans, that they'll put that by itself. It needs to be so that in order to show purpose. Okay, and that's the end of part 4 of adverbial clauses.